Hello, my name is Jason Noble, and my talk today is from junior engineer to productive engineer. And I had someone point out on Twitter that junior engineers are not necessarily not productive, so that is not the intent of this talk. The intent is to give you the process that we've gone through to help bring junior engineers into our team. So a little bit about me. 15 years professional experience, 6 years Ruby on Rails. I've taught Rails classes in Atlanta for 3 to 4 years. Top 45 contributor to Ruby on Rails, and one of my students pointed out I'm now a top 47 contributor. So I'll have to work on that. I'm a senior software developer and lead at Converge. I'm a mentor, and I'm an instructor at DaVinci Coders. Okay. Converge is the company I work for. They were founded in 1980. Headquartered in Georgia. They work in intelligent energy, so we help utilities reduce their energy demands. So we'll turn off your AC, make your pool pump run at 3 in the morning instead of in the middle of the day, and so on. So these are some of the devices that we talk to via Ruby on Rails. It's pretty exciting. So, back in March of 2012, we hired our first junior developer, Beth Medina. She was a Cold Fusion developer for a couple of years. She took 7 years off to raise some children, and when she returned, the internet was a very different place. Converge at that point didn't have a training program per se. She came into work, we kind of threw her a couple books, go read Agile Web Development. We bought the Pragmatic Studio Ruby on Rails courses for her, the Ruby on Rails tutorial by Michael Hartle, and those are all really good resources if you're looking to get into Rails. She would, at Converge we pair all the time, so she would pair with senior developers occasionally, but usually we're too busy working on, stuff. So we gave her a small side project to build Rails app from scratch that would allow versions of our iPhone app to be provisioned correctly. Last year at this conference, there was a breakout session moderated by Mike Gehard, and we talked about the fact that we need to train new developers. I found that the panel ended with a lot of questions, like how do you grow developers so that they gain experience, and how does a new developer get started? I walked away from the conference wanting to get back into teaching Rails. It had been a couple of years, and I really enjoyed teaching, and so I figured out how to get into teaching as well as talking with Converge about developing a junior program. John Williams is a guy I work with. He has a background in sales, mostly cell phone industry. He decided to get into programming, so he enrolled at DaVinci Coders in Louisville. And he picked me as a mentor as part of that, and the associated. We did a lot of mentoring outside of work. So he would show up at Converge after work 2 or 3 times a week. I'd spend an hour or 2 with him just kind of going over what they went over in class, explaining things that he didn't really understand per se, and really testing him to see if, help expand his knowledge, and also approaching topics in a different way. So you can have MVC explained to you, but unless you are asked 17 ways of how to implement it, you kind of don't get the gist of it. Converge started interviewing in January 2013 for junior people, and we really focused on the personality and the passion. We were looking for someone that didn't necessarily have any Rails experience. We wanted someone who was willing to jump in, dive in, and learn things. Our interview process consisted of a FizzBuzz type algorithm, sorting algorithm, can you sort these index cards, loops, arrays, how does a web browser work? Just kind of the basics, have you used a computer before? John was hired as a contractor in January, and it effectively doubled our engineering staff. In April, 3 months later, he converted from contract to perm, and there was quite a few lessons that we learned through this process. The first one is probably the most important. We found that 2 junior developers are better than 1. And the reason behind that is that junior developers tend to be, I don't know if afraid is the right word, but they're worried about affecting someone's productivity at work by stopping them and saying, hey, how does this work? And so if there's 2 junior developers, they can really work with each other. And where one is stuck, the other one might be able to get past it. And just pairing, working off each other. We also found it very helpful to have one of the senior developers have dedicated time to working with the juniors. We found that when John first came on, it was 20 to 25% of their time where they're explicitly tasked with work with the junior developer. Work through a story, have them ask you questions, general domain knowledge, etc. Juniors pairing with each other works really well. When one of them gets stuck, they can help the other one out. If they're both really stuck, they can figure out the right question to ask a senior developer. It's completely different for 2 junior people to come to you and say, this doesn't work, and that's the end of the question. It's much different to say, I've got a route in the routes file that routes to this controller in action. The action is pulling records from the database, but it's not getting the right records. How should I change this query? A senior developer can listen to that question, give them an answer, explain the answer, and it won't take them forever to figure out what's going wrong. We also tried, we called it trying, which is basically 2 junior developers side by side with a senior developer in the middle. The junior developer on his right is working on one story, junior developer on the left is working on another one, and the senior just flips back and forth as they get stuck on things or have questions. Warning, the mentor will find this exhausting because you're constantly context switching. Some of the processes that we used, I took the Ruby Cones project, which is a intro to Ruby project that is basically test-driven to get you familiar with Ruby methods. And basically, I created stories out of each one of the files in Ruby Cones. And so they have a tracker story to implement about arrays. And so they have to go and get all the tests passing, open a pull request, which involves creating a branch in Git. So it gives them a lot of experience with the tools that we use on a daily basis. Git branching, merging, resolving conflicts, rebasing, etc. Second one I did was convert the command line crash course to tracker stories. So you would have one that, learn about ls. And I added a bunch of questions, what does the -r flag do, or what is the, that sort of thing. And they had a bunch of tracker stories. So at this point, because they had worked through those processes, they really know enough to start working on Converge stories. So they know GitHub, they know the pull request process. We use pull requests to get code feedback. And so we started asking our iteration planning team to start thinking of the juniors as they're going through stories. And if there was a story that had, we want to change this label from X to Y, that's an excellent junior story, because they're going to have to go and find a test that is currently passing that needs to fail, make the test fail, fix the code, make the test pass, open a pull request, and they get the whole process. We also had them focus on Jenkins build failures. Senior developers get to that when they can, but juniors have a lot of time to work through that. So after a couple of months, we found that the junior developers had gotten to know our test suite pretty well, and so they were working on more and more advanced stories. And so we had them pair with senior developers. They were at a point where they could follow along and ask questions as the senior developer was working through things. And the involvement of the mentor or senior developer became less and less. So it was more of a, hey, let's go spend an hour this week talking about X, not every 10 minutes. In September 2013, Josh joined the team. He's a 2013 G School graduate. And Beth left Converge to take a contract to permanent position with Rally Software in Boulder. And so we're excited to have our junior staff go out into the world and impress people. So that's all I had. The top one is a rate my talk. Email, Twitter, GitHub. The slides are available online. And I'm an instructor at the Da Vinci School in Louisville. So if you're a junior developer wanting to get into this field, you may want to look at that class as an option. Is there any questions? Yes?
What did you expect of the trying drive? Because you mentioned that it was exhausting for the teacher.
Yes.
How about for the students, and what did you hope to gain from this approach?
Okay, so the question was, what did we hope to gain from the trying process? And really the process was so that each junior developer could be working on a different bug. And they're really working on their own, but they're also pairing. And so the thought was that if we put two junior developers, they're going to be moving somewhat slowly through a story. But if we have a junior, or the senior and a junior working on a story, then our combined velocity would go up. So the two juniors would be working on the stories, the senior would be helping as they got stuck.
Did it work out that way for the students?
John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it worked out great. It allowed me and the other junior to pick up the story on our own, try to work through it on our own, and as we got stuck, reach out to Jason for help. I can tell you it was very exhausting for Jason because we would have two completely different stories and two completely different parts of our application. So I can see where it was really hard for him to figure out what was going on in each story. But for the time frame we did that, it was a great experience. It was great to work through the story ourselves, and have somebody there who isn't going to get stuck, so you can kind of work through this well.
So in case some people didn't hear that, basically he was saying that he found it useful because he's working on his own, but when he gets stuck, he can ask me a quick question and get right back into it. It's, allowing both of them to be productive while the senior is there to help either one of them when they get stuck. Questions? Yes?
It sounds like you have different levels of junior developers. Like you had some people that had basic computer knowledge that you guys pretty much wrapped up, and then you mentioned hiring Josh out of G School, and that's, I feel maybe perhaps a different level of competency. And how do you treat that in respect to your junior developers?
Okay. So the question was, we have hired junior developers with varying amounts of experience. So Beth came into the role with absolutely no Ruby on Rails. John had had 11 weeks of Ruby on Rails instruction, and G School 6 months. So really the process is the same. I think how long it took them to get through the process is what changed. So it took Beth probably 6 to 9 months to get up and productive. John was productive in 2 or 3 months, and Josh is productive now. He's been on the team for 3 weeks. So, questions? Yes?
You said you pair all the time. Did you try or think about rotating as you develop your normal pair rotation?
Yes. So the question was, we pair all the time. Did we think about rotating the juniors through the senior pairings? And we did do that. We do that now. The problem that I really see at first is the junior developers are struggling with two things. The first one is Ruby on Rails itself. How do I develop software? What is a controller? Should I be editing the view or a helper or that sort of thing? And those sorts of questions a senior developer can help people with, but it really slows them down. And so our junior program was set so that they could get comfortable with our domain, so the energy sector in general, talk to this transmitter, what's an endpoint, what's a device, et cetera. Get them comfortable with the domain as well as the technology. And then when they work with the senior developer, they're really, they know what an endpoint is. The senior doesn't have to explain that. So they're able to ask more, intelligent is not the right word, but more involved questions. So they could possibly help steer where a solution would go. Whereas brand new junior people would just be sitting there and watching Chris fly through the Vim editing, and what was that? So, other questions? Yes.
Was there any curriculum that you used for books, design patterns,
No. With Beth, like I mentioned, it was the Agile Web Development book, the Rails tutorial, etc. John and Josh both had Rails experience prior. Really, the process that we employed with all of them was the Ruby Cones tracker project, so that they understood pull requests, they understand the Git branching model. How do I rebase this so it's based off the latest branch and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a customized curriculum. It's not an industry standard. Okay. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about future plans?
Yes. So future plans, I was recently promoted to a lead software developer. I've got 3 junior developer people under me now, and hopefully next year we're going to be expanding the plan. Haven't talked with Lee about that yet, but I hope we expand it. And really it's, get our junior people more and more senior so that they can contribute more and more to the team. Okay. Thank you very much.